Welcome to the Strengthandchiro Podcast. Introducing your hosts, Doctor of Chiropractic, Stephen Redmon, and powerlifting world champion, Brogan Williams. Join us as we explore evidence-based chiropractic and sports science through the lens of movement, strength, performance, and overall health.
There you go. Okay, welcome to the podcast. Dr. Mike G, the man, the myth, the legend, Doctor of Chiropractic. How you doing, bro?
I'm very good. How are you guys?
I'm very good. We just spent the last 5 minutes talking about some of the most differences between New Zealand and America. But once again, what's the most notable thing about New Zealand for you, Dr. Mike?
Well, the first thing that pops into my mind is the rugby, the All Blacks, and then the second thing is the things that I've seen. I've never been to New Zealand; it's on the bucket list, but I have seen pictures and videos and things of just the beautiful landscape. So it looks like something out of National Geographic.
Yeah. It is. It's not bad. It's not bad at all. I'm blessed, lucky enough to live quite close to the beach, and it's insane. It's super beautiful. Obviously not all of New Zealand is like that, but so much of it is like that. Okay, so it's great to have you on the podcast. Obviously, we connected over social media, over Instagram, and we've chatted back and forth and had some great chats on social media. You obviously know Stephen because through the MPI stuff. Is that how you guys have met? You guys know each other quite well, right? Is it right?
We met each other through the FTCA first, and then we met in person through MPI.
Yep.
So you're both MPI people.
That's right.
Believers. I don't know. Is it? It seems to be gathering some popularity. That's for sure.
Yeah, I think hopefully it's the future of our profession, at least on the educational side of it. But Stephen and I both did it, and I owe a lot to that group for things that I do, in daily practice.
That is definitely something interesting that I want to touch on because, me and Stephen have talked a lot about evidence-based practice and how that looks in contrast to the more traditional philosophical model of chiropractic. For those who don't follow the podcast, I spent about 3 years at Chiro College, and then I have moved on to do masters and my PhD. But what the big thing for me at R1 in New Zealand is very philosophical. And I was chatting to Stephen. He mentioned that you went to quite a philosophical based college as well. So I was really interested to hear, one, how was that for you? And two, what was it like? I'm sure there must have been some type of aha moment where you found MPI, or you kind of saw the evidence-based stuff and kind of cling to that and moved in that direction.
Yeah. I'll say this, for any chiropractic student out there, people thinking about going to chiropractic school, school is really what you make of it. And I'm a big believer that the learning does not stop in the confines of school. You got to go outside of school and learn some stuff, right? So, the college I went to definitely had a decent amount of philosophy stuff. I knew early on I wanted to get involved with the MPI group. I had heard good things, and as soon as I kind of got involved with them and doing some of my own kind of searching outside of school and learning other things, it was pretty easy for me to kind of latch on to some of the evidence-based stuff. And it's just how I practice now.
Yeah. And so in terms of how you practice compared to a normal, I suppose, how do you say normal, but a more traditional chiropractic practice, how's what you do differ, especially to the average? I suppose a lot of people listening to this podcast know chiropractic, but then there's also quite a few people who are in the sports science strength space as well who don't actually know. It took me I was 2 years into Chiro College and I still don't know what chiropractic was. So, I mean, I'm sure there are people listening that don't understand. But as obviously you're very much based around functional movement, rehab, exercise. Give us a bit of a rundown. What does that look like? Why is it so important to you to incorporate those other things into what you do as a chiropractor?
Sure. So, all right. So I'll answer the first question of what makes me different. And you kind of already touched on it, is I do a lot of rehab. I would go as far as to say I practice more so almost like a PT than I do a chiropractor. So take that for what it's worth.
Yeah.
The other thing is I spend 30 minutes with all of my patients on their subsequent kind of care plan visits. That's pretty much unheard of in the chiropractic world. Going back to kind of the more traditional chiropractic setting, it's usually, 5, maybe 10 minutes. And that's 30 minutes with me, the doctor. That's not 30 minutes with my CAs well, not that I have any CAs at this point, but that's not 30 minutes and 5 to 10 is with me and 20 minutes is with somebody else. That's 30 minutes of physician guided care.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, I mean, I think the big reason I practice that way is because I truly believe in it. If I didn't believe in it, I wouldn't do it. I don't do this because somebody told me that, I think this is the best way to practice. No, it's just, I kind of developed a style. It's kind of this hybrid chiropractic PT mix. I think it's very, I know there's been a lot of sports chiros out there in the past. But I think we're kind of just on the beginning of this threshold where we're about to kind of break into PTs and chiropractors looking more similar than they ever have. And I think a lot of chiropractors are going to kind of move in this direction. At least the evidence-based ones.
It's interesting what you say, because, if people are following the guidelines or if people are reading the studies and they're doing their due diligence, we're going to see these professions kind of converge, in terms of what they're actually doing, and in terms of the treatments, in terms of how they're interacting with the patients. And that's it. I find when I was at Chiro College, that was a real bad thing. People they're very scared that they're going to lose their identity as a profession, but it's actually a very positive thing. It's an extremely positive thing. The more evidence-based we can become, the better, absolute better. And so it's really hard to. I remember when I was in college, it was always hard talking to mentors or people like that, because I'd always be coming from that angle of, hey, is it so bad if we all function or if we all practice similarly, if it means that we're adhering to these evidence-based principles, which I often got no, because people definitely want to cling on to more traditional chiropractors, want to cling on to the subluxation model. Which leads me to a question for both you guys. How do you guys feel? I mean, we've chatted about it before a little bit, Stephen, but in terms of how you both practice, what are your thoughts about I call it the S word now, because we don't, I always used to tell my friends, I'm never going to use the subluxation word, but talking about the subluxation word, how do you feel about it? Do you use it in your practice? And if not, or if you do, why? And that's to both of you. But you can lead us off, our guest, Dr. Mike.
I do not use that that word. Not that I hate it or anything. It's just not. I just don't think that there's a good. I think there's a better way of explaining it, and I think that word, it just caused a lot of kind of headache in our profession, and we could go down that rabbit hole, but I'd rather not. But I usually just tell my patients that, when I'm palpating them, which is a fancy doctor term for just feeling how their spine or their joints move, what I'm looking for is segmental restrictions. And with those restrictions, it's my job to find them. And with the adjustment, I kind of make sure that they move better or help them move better with a chiropractic manipulation. Yeah. I just try to keep it super simple, super basic. And I think that's really just the extent of what patients really want to hear.
Good. Yeah, it makes sense. Stephen?
Yeah, I don't use that word with patients. They don't care about it. I mean, I have had some patients who come in and use that word themselves, including a patient who worked in a setting like that prior, but I've never used that terminology. Very much like Mike mentioned, I sit the patient down, I do my palpation, I find out where things aren't moving, I ask for feedback from the patient as well. We adjust it, we do pain-provoking movements before and after, and see how things are moving.
Mm. And obviously, I know you're a big fan, Stephen, of the old, as we call it, lighting up the CT junction. And I think with Dr. Mike on your Instagram, one of the first videos I went through and had a look at your stuff, one of the first ones you put up was the old CT NPI move yourself. If I was to ask you, what is your favorite adjustment, if you have one? I know some chiros don't, and it might seem like an arbitrary question, but if you do have a favorite, which is it and why?
I mean, I love a good CT junction adjustment. It usually gets if somebody's never had that adjustment before, and I kind of warm them up to it and kind of walk them through it. But that's a big one that I use a lot. And I mean, just going off the junctional areas, I do a lot of. I mean, pretty much on all my patients, there's some form of TL junction restriction, a lot of low back pain stuff, a lot of, breathing mechanics that are altered, and TL junction on most people is somewhere that they absolutely need adjusted, and I adjust it.
Yeah.
And it's a good one. I love it.
Yeah, I've heard chatting to, especially with a lot of the NPI guys, and even I chat to Dr. Mike Woodbury quite a bit.
He's in my neck of the woods too here.
Yeah. He's a really great adjuster. And I used to, when I was at chiro school, he used to send me videos of adjusting all the time, and I would kind of like save it to my phone and then put it through the slow-mo, and I'd watch it fast, I'd watch it slow. And I mean, I read you actually said something similar. I'm not sure where I read it. When I knew I was going to have you on the podcast, I did a little bit of research. But
there you go.
Yeah, but somewhere I heard you saying that you were just like, you loved it so much and you wanted to be so good at it that you just watched everyone and you just learned as much as possible. And what does that look like now that you're practicing? Obviously, you don't have as much time to do it, but how do you keep yourself sharp? How do you keep yourself learning?
So where you read that was on the MPI page. They asked a few of us to do a little bit of kind of feedback review of MPI and our experience with it. So I was lucky enough and to be somebody that they asked to write that review. And that was actually one of the questions they asked us, is like, how do you, keep your skills sharp? And Corey Campbell of MPI, he's the vice president, hopefully will be president soon. He is somebody that from an adjusting standpoint, I idolize. Like I want to be as good as Corey Campbell, which is it's a tall task. I mean, the guy's an animal.
He's good at
and just every time I can, jump on, and like he's got some videos on the MPI stuff and on YouTube, and when he would come and do the seminars and stuff, I mean, I would just pick apart everything he's doing, like where his feet, hands, etc. Like it's just like I feel like the best comparison is like when Kobe probably watched down all MJ and stole all of his moves, right? Like,
yeah.
I mean, everybody's their own person, but you watch the person that most resembles you, and just pick apart their stuff and practice and practice and practice until you get it right.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And what about you, Stephen? Are you in a similar boat?
I forgot the overall question.
Pretty much. I mean, just overall, it's like, how do you keep yourself sharp? And if you obviously you have certain people that you respect. You're part of the MPI circle. Who are some adjusters that you really love and aspire to be at that technical level?
I mean, all the MPI instructors are amazing. I've been lucky enough to take a seminar with all of them, and it's insane how good they are. So they're definitely where I want to be at with my adjusting skills. Thankfully, on the weekend, I work at a more high volume place, and I get to put my hands on as many people as I can possibly imagine. And so that also has tremendously helped me. improve my skill level.
Mm. And so going back to a little bit of your background, Dr. Mike, you mentioned off air, I think, that you come from a soccer background. How long did you play that for? When did you kind of stop? And following on from that, was the sports stuff what got you into chiropractic, or was it something else?
So yeah, I mean, I think it's kind of like how you said, rugby is like that sport every kid plays in New Zealand. I feel like soccer and like T-ball in America is where most kids start, right? So started that. Didn't like baseball as much because I had too much standing around. I needed to move a little bit more. So soccer it was. So I mean, I played that all the way through growing up, through high school. Took a little hiatus. Kind of burned myself out, and then got back into it in college with our club team at Virginia Tech, which is probably one of the top 20 club teams in the whole country, which was awesome. Good group of guys as well. Originally, I went to Virginia Tech for engineering. I was a biomechanical engineer. So I've always had an interest in biomechanics, specifically human biomechanics. Like my dream job back then was to design prosthetics for people. And I just very quickly realized I needed a more human aspect to the line of work I was doing. So kind of floated around for a little bit and looked at some of the healthcare professions and fell in love with chiropractic for a few reasons. But the majority of it was I got to work with people and really put that love of biomechanics to use. So.
No, that's cool. That's real interesting. And man, the biomechanical aspect is often really overlooked, and that's definitely something that's like circulating. Like we're probably all quite aware of the pain science crew that are very quite popular now. And there's like this kind of uprising of people, me and Stephen included, that are kind of like often advocating for technique, and often advocating for biomechanics and the understanding of biomechanics. And often Dr. Locke, who's an incredible physio from Australia, is putting up like really interesting and like snarky comments, which I love to read and share. But the sentiment behind it is what is absolutely correct. And it's just, we have so many practitioners out there. And I definitely know this, and I've seen this for myself, even in New Zealand, people that really, they just don't understand biomechanics. And I think having a background in sports is paramount. I think it's very, very important. I think it's very helpful for someone, even if you're just going to go into like general, public or general pop, whatever, having that understanding what it means to some extent to perform as an athlete, I think is extremely important. Obviously, I'm like biased because I did so much of that. Like I was a powerlifter for so long that was a big part of my life. But I always used to have an argument with my friend. He was a CrossFit coach, and he wasn't athletic at all, and like not at all. But he was a great coach, and he always said to me, I'd rather go to a coach who's good at coaching. And I always, no necessarily, doesn't have any necessary like background or experience, but is really good at coaching. And I always said to him, like, I would rather go to someone that has more experience and is also good at coaching, but has the experience to draw on, because it's all the intangibles. Like being a coach myself for almost a decade and going to so many other coaches as well over my life, I've really like learned so much from people on the intangibles. I think it's like just watching how they do things, similar to what you're saying. You really take it upon yourself to learn. You slow it down, you watch it. Where's their foot positioning? What are they doing? How are they thrusting? It's the same with anything, whether it's chiropractic, whether it's basketball, soccer, American football, powerlifting, whatever. It's like comes across that kind of similar line of thought. So, it's just an interesting way of looking at it. But to circle back around, it's super important that people have adequate training in biomechanics. And we had one paper. We had one paper in the first year at NZCC, and that's it. And that's pretty shocking. It's pretty shocking to know that there's chiropractors rolling around with one biomechanic paper under their belt. But obviously, people, there's always extra learning that goes on and stuff like that. But interesting question I wanted to talk to you about. obviously before we were touching on how you were different, how your treatments are different and stuff like that. I've had my head in the books for the last 4 months working on this thesis, and it's very much where my head is at right now, understanding and researching the physiology behind an adjustment. But I was interested to hear your thoughts as a clinician, as a practitioner, someone that's really putting their hands on people every day and helping them, how you cement those short-term changes of an adjustment into long-term changes. I think we can all probably agree, maybe and maybe not. It'd be interesting to hear if you disagree. But I know the traditional model of chiropractic is like the subluxation idea that you can drastically change the autonomic system. You can drastically change and heal different types of dis-ease, random, or disease. But you've got these stories about asthma and colic and cancer and all these big stories, and that's cool. But I know like so many chiros have that kind of God complex. Where they kind of think they're a neurosurgeon and they think that they can really change everything, when obviously most of the research shows, hey, it's doing a lot. We're talking like range of motion, pain, proprioception, all these different things, but a lot of it is short term, from what I can tell. So in your experience, how do you take those short term changes and help your patients move better, get into better position, and hold those changes long term? And then after we've heard your thoughts, it'd be cool to hear your thoughts on it as well, Stephen.
Yeah, I tell every single one of my patients that the chiropractic manipulation that I do to them is a temporary change. We're still researching, right? So we could do it all into the physiology and pain modulation and everything like that, but nothing changes unless something changes, right? So if I adjust somebody and they go back to the same daily, weekly habits and different things, like, my adjustment is merely temporary.
Yep.
But, and I think you guys are probably, doesn't take a rocket surgeon to figure out what my answer is going to be here, but if you can take somebody and adjust them and then give them a plan, because that's what a lot of people are missing in conservative care, is a plan, right? So, and without a plan, we're just wishing for good things to happen. So if you can put it together a solid plan of reform and how they're going to make adaptations over time through the exercises and rehab and different things I'm having them do, that manifests into a permanent, well, not permanent, but a more long-term change. And as long as, and I tell all my patients this, as long as you don't have to be perfect, but you have to be consistent. And as long as you're consistent with the things that I'm giving you, we will drastically reduce the risk of this injury or condition from kind of resurfacing. Because I said, the last thing I want is for us to have to start this. And that's what we see it, right? Is we see patients, 6 months later, a year down the road, they're back and the same thing is going on. It's because we never actually fixed the problem. We just turned off the check engine light in the car.
Yeah. That's yeah. And Tony Stark?
Very much the same for me as well. I like I was telling you before we got started, I had a patient who I did not realize was a medical doctor until they left. And the way I talk to them is, it's basically the same thing. Obviously, I would have changed up some things on how I explain things if I would have known I were a medical doctor, but I knew they were in healthcare field, so kept going the healthcare route, beat with them explaining things, but there were some things I could have explained a little more intricately that they would have probably appreciated, but I still got like a 5-star review out of it, so I guess I did something right.
I guess you did. It must have been that CT adjustment.
Must have been.
That's definitely interesting, and I agree, especially when it comes to what you were briefly talking about with the physiology behind the adjustment, and the way you explain that makes perfect sense. And I think it's really important as well, that communication between the clinician and the patient. Like, I've had a lot of family members or friends when they found out I was doing chiro, they would say, "Oh, I saw." It's always like one or the other, right? It's always like either people are like really like they're like, "I believe in chiropractic." You're like, "Well, it's not a religion," but okay. They're really like enthusiastic, or they're like, and they look at you like, I had one lady tell my wife that a chiropractor ruined her life and broke her back, and she was in the hospital, and just terrible. And prior to being a chiropractor and whatnot, I was a pastor for about 5 to 10 years at a church. And my wife goes, "Oh, like he's also a pastor part-time at the moment." And she goes, "Oh, like the church ruined my life as well." So I was like, "Oh, that's 2 for 2. Like I'm out of here." Some people you can't, some Karens you just can't, help. But do you often have patients like that come in? Like I was saying before, sorry, with some of my friends and family, they say to me, "Oh, the chiropractor, I had a sore back. I went in and saw him, and he smashed me." They say these like real provocative terms, like it was a side posture, obviously, but like he smashed my lower back and it was sore, and they went away. And the chiropractor obviously didn't communicate the possible, I don't even know if you'd call it side effects, but the possible, changes in the body that could happen after an adjustment, and that maybe a little bit of soreness or tightness or a reaction to an adjustment is not a total negative thing when you're trying to change up some of the physiology. But if the chiropractor or the clinician's not communicating properly about what could happen, it leaves people just guessing, and then they go home and they're stiff and they might be sore, and then they get already angry with the chiro. So pretty much my question is, and once again we'll go to Dr. Mike and then Stephen, do you guys sometimes have clients that you feel like you can't make a right move around? And if you do, how do you accommodate those types of people?
Yeah, I think you're always going to have your skeptics, right? You always tell the 50-50, "Oh, I love chiropractors. Oh, I can't stand them." And the people, I never get mad because I just think to myself, well, yeah, that's actually had a gym owner I sat down and met with, and the first words out of his mouth were, "I'm not really a big fan of chiropractors." And I followed it up with, "Well, with some of them, neither am I." So it's just, hey, that's something we have in common.
Yeah.
It just depends. And then I always ask them, like, "Hey, what do you do for a living?" And they'll say, I'm in whatever, real estate. All right. So, like, do you think you're good at your job? Yeah, I'm pretty good at my job. I've sold this many houses this year. My clients love me. Great. Do you think there are people in your profession that aren't so good? And they say, of course. They say yes. Of course, there's the few that kind of bring down the whole profession, right? So I say, well, kind of same thing. I get it. There are some people that are not great in this profession, and I'm sorry, maybe you ended up going into their office. But there are a lot of rock stars and all stars in our profession too that have really done a lot of good for their communities. I've been very like blessed with the patients that I've got, even the ones that have been a little bit skeptical, or the ones that have seen a chiropractor in the past that they weren't so keen on. I think when they come into my office, they get that sense of like, oh, there's something different here. Which, I guess with the rehab and stuff, but I think the big thing that's missing out of our profession, and I think it goes along with some of the skepticism, like you kind of mentioned before, is clinicians not doing a good job of explaining something. But that's probably because, not that the clinician can't explain it, isn't doing a good job, but they're rushing, right? They have other patients to see. There's a lot of things going on. That's why, I think if you could take that extra few minutes out of your day and time and, set aside, with the new patient appointments, all mine are an hour long. Like, I want to get to know this person. I want to know what they're thinking. I always tell them, like, hey, if you have any questions for me or want to know why I'm doing something, please ask. I don't feel like people feel heard or are given the opportunity to ask those questions to help kind of clarify. They're just kind of told what to do. So, and then, it's in our nature to be a little skeptical. So if somebody's telling you something and you don't believe in it, then you just had a bad experience, right? But if you're allowed to sit and ask questions and talk through some things and whatnot, people are smart. People sniff out the BS. People are getting smarter. So sorry, that was kind of a long-winded answer to that, but that's just been my experience with it.
No, it's good. And one example of that on kind of in the on a bigger platform would be obviously what happened with Joe Rogan, in terms of he's not a fan of chiropractors. He had a bad experience. A chiropractor did a compression test on him, and he said, "Oh, it's not sore, so you don't have a bulging disc," and proceeded to treat him for a year, and nothing got better. Then eventually Joe Rogan went and got an MRI or a CT or whatever it was, and the medical doctor said you have a bulging disc, and got it sorted for him. However, they went you did a different type of treatment, or I think he got referred to a physio or something. But he was so angry that the chiro got it wrong, and then he went on this massive witch hunt, and now he just destroys chiros every chance he gets. It's really sad to see. Really unfortunate that one person didn't follow through, and just did one ortho. And maybe it wasn't even that. Maybe Joe Rogan's, the way he talks about it is not necessarily what happened, but regardless, it's just sad to see that. So, but anyway.
Yeah, well, we don't have to get it. We don't have to get it. Nobody's perfect, right? That's why they call it practice. We don't always get it right the first time, but it's the blatant disregard for, something's not right here. Like, I need to move on and either try something else or send this person, we got to kind of swallow our pride every once in a while and check our ego at the door and say, all right, I think I'm really good at what I do, but clearly what I'm doing is not working. So let's send you to somebody else. So that's what should have happened. And then Joe probably would have thanked the chiropractor and said, okay, this guy at least got me somewhere that could help me. And I don't know what the other chiropractor was or wasn't doing, but, and I think that goes for all medical professions. Like, sometimes we just have to check the ego at the door and understand where we can help and where we probably can't help.
Yeah. And following guidelines and trying to be evidence-based seems to have keep you on that straight and narrow in a sense, because you've got something else you're referring to, opposed to 120-year-old philosophy that may not be necessarily correct, or like an old way of looking at things. I always say to Stephen, we understand that bones don't move out of place and that we're not pushing bones back into place, like a lot of these old thought processes, yet all of the main systems, constant and a lot of diversified and upper cervical, they're all static listings, like ASRs, anterior, superior, right, it's body left, body right, it's all these static listings, and we're looking at the vertebra in space as if it's done this, and we need to push on it another way to make it do this. And a lot of chiropractors, they communicate that way, and people walk into their office and they feel that they're being told that they have bones out of place, and you've got that power imbalance, between the and it's really that's a gripe. There's one gripe I really do have, and one reason why I ended up transitioning out of chiropractic college was because I was being forced or told to communicate that way to my patients when I knew scientifically it was incorrect. Stephen, you want to give us some of your ideas on that?
Yes. So with me, the patients, if they come in skeptical, it's usually because the chiropractor was too aggressive with them in the past, where they did the same thing over and over every time, expecting something different to happen, or they just had too long of a treatment plan, too much that they're paying up front, and they just weren't happy with it. And the biggest compliment that I actually get from my patients is that they say I'm gentle but aggressive at the same time, and I kind of take that back to MPI's approach with adjusting. The specificity of the adjustment comes with the patient setup. So I'm always adjusting how I'm putting the patient on the table before I adjust them, and allows me to use levers biomechanically more efficiently and use less of my weight, because force is mass times acceleration. So if you can be faster in a different position for that patient, you may be more forceful without being more aggressive. And so aggressiveness or lack of aggressiveness is definitely what my patients comment on the most with me.
And just touching on that, do you have any really difficult patients? Sorry, not difficult in terms of how they're acting, but to give you a little bit of context, every time it came time to practice palpation or adjustments or anything like that at college, I was like the first person to get down, and I was like, everyone wanted to have a go adjusting a 400 kg squatting powerlifter, and I would even have people from different years coming up to me in the cafe being like, oh, yo, like, we have a lot of Canadians, but like, yo, can I like blow up your lower back later? You know, like wanting, like, I want to have a hood on you. I want to have a hood on you. Like, I want to have a go. Like, I'm like, yeah, I know. Like, and I was pretty good about it. I was like, yeah, like, just like line up. Whoever wants to have a go. Because it was a good experience for people, because, you know, they're probably not going to get to put their hands on another, you know, extremely large 180 kg powerlifter again anytime soon. Do you guys have any do you have any experience with bigger dudes, or even like I had some people in my class that were really like flexible, like really flexible, and you like couldn't get an adjustment? I don't know. Yeah, Stephen, you first, and then we'll go to Dr. Mike.
Yeah, I think I showed you a picture of the patient that picked me up once. Like,
yeah.
He's a big dude. I've definitely had my fair share of big dudes. In one of the offices I sometimes help out in that neck of the woods, people are just big boys, big Southern boys, like pushing 300 plus pounds, big boys, and they're difficult to adjust. But if you do it right, if you set them up right and they're relaxed, there are ways to make it go without being too aggressive. But sometimes when in doubt, just use the pelvic drop.
Oh, yeah.
And then I'm one of those, like, I have a Gumby neck. I call it a Gumby neck. I can just kind of bend it around wherever I want it to go. And people in school were like deathly afraid trying to adjust my neck because they couldn't put it in tension. And I've had a handful of those patients now on my hands, and I'm just like, yeah, this is frustrating. And obviously, you probably don't need to adjust them that much if they're able to get that much mobility in there. So there's more strengthening that you recommend.
Mm. And if you really had to adjust them, do you think it comes down to it comes down to some of the other factors of a thrust, like maybe speed?
Yeah, speed is important, and patient setup and speed is going to be your friend if they're a more bendy person. I remember I got Corey Campbell to adjust me once, and he was like, you know, it doesn't really feel stuck. I was like, oh no, it's stuck. Just do it. And he, with his quick hands, he like blew up my upper cervicals, and yeah,
beautiful.
It's all in the speed and the setup.
Nice. And what about you, Dr. Mike? What do you think?
Yeah, patients are going to come in all different shapes and sizes, and one of my offices is in a gym, so I do see several, and by large I mean very, muscular power lifter type individuals. So kind of touching on what Stephen said, technique is everything, and especially when you're trying to move around a patient that is 300 pounds. Because like Stephen said, you kind of want them to be relaxed, and especially if you're doing an anterior on somebody that weighs a solid 100 pounds more than you do, you got to just be careful, and you got to that's why mastering your technique is so important. With the Gumby people, very, very hyper flexible people, I always ask them, because those are the people that tend to have a lot of like the really serious injuries, the ACL tears, the rotator cuff tears, etc. So yes, those people absolutely need strength and stability training. And that's what's great about kind of what I do, is there's some people like that have gone to chiropractors without a lot of success. And there's things that I don't even need to adjust some of those people in certain regions. Some regions, yes, but other regions, even like their main complaint, like I might not need to actually physically do a manipulation there, but if we can do some rehab exercises with them, that takes them further and farther than any of the adjustments I do.
What really makes, in your opinion, exercise and rehab so important in the musculoskeletal space? And within those things, so rehab and exercise and all types of modalities, what do you do and why? Obviously you don't have to give like a big spiel about science, and really just like, what are some of the modalities that you find really work, and why do you use them, and what modalities do you find have the most bang for their buck long term?
Sure. Yeah, no, I mean, I won't even dive into the science because I wouldn't be able to articulate it as well as you do. I just listen to guys like you who have read all the research, and then you take all those clinical pearls out and give them to people like me. And I just cherry pick what you guys do. I want to go back to something that you said though, about how you're like, I almost feel bad because it's so simple, right? Sometimes we do feel that way. I have stopped feeling that way, because if it was that simple, then they would have been able to figure it out, right? The patient would have just been like, oh, I'll just do this. So something that's simple to you or Steven or any other clinician, like, it took us a long time to learn some very, very simple concepts. And that's okay. That's part of why we do what we do, right? So the patient's coming to us for our clinical skills, but more importantly, like our expertise, right? Because it's taken a long time to learn some very simple things. So what's simple to us is clearly not simple to them. But in terms of what I do, in terms of modalities, I don't have any modalities per se that I have. And by modalities, I mean like machine type stuff. Eventually it would be nice to have a shockwave and a laser. I know those have the research that have backed them up. It's just, whenever I can financially afford one of those, both very expensive pieces of equipment for anybody listening, not cheap. So what I do in my office outside of adjusting and rehab, I do dry needle. I am certified in that. I do cupping. I have the IOSTM tools and stuff, and I hold up my 2 thumbs every once in a while and show them to patients, and that's what I do. But so mostly just soft tissue interventions, and I tell patients the same thing. Like, they'll ask, what's the difference between this, and this, and I say, again, keeping it very simple and very basic for the patient. It's all used to evoke a small inflammatory change in the tissue. We always think of inflammation as something bad. You roll your ankle on the basketball court and it swells up like a grapefruit, and it hurts. And of course it does. But inflammation is our body's response to an injury. So if I can create a little bit of inflammation in the tissue or the surrounding musculature, your body is now consciously aware of that, and it will start to adapt and change more rapidly. And that's kind of the simple version that I tell patients. So yeah, on top of rehab and adjusting, that's pretty much at the moment all I do. And like I said, maybe a few years down the line, when the practice is booming and I have my own space, maybe there'll be a laser and a shockwave in there too. But nice. I'm big on the rehab stuff. So yeah, I'd love to have like almost a gym looking setup in my office one day. So we're getting there.
And so what about exercise? Obviously that's a part of it.
Absolutely. So it's a non-negotiable thing for me in my office, right? So if you're coming to see me, you are getting rehab exercises. Every single patient, no matter what they come in with, there's something that we can do, because my 3-step process in my office is pinpoint the problem. So that means let's do a thorough examination. Plan. So let's come up with a plan of action, a care plan that we are going to agree upon. How many times a week, for how long? This is what we're going to do. This is how we're going to progress you. And the third part is prevent. I like the alliteration. So it's pinpoint, plan, and prevent. So the prevention for patients is the rehab exercise. And I tell my patients, you're going to have this portfolio of exercises by the end of your treatment plan. They get sent a copy of that. And I say, as long as you're consistent with that, you drastically reduce the prevalence of this coming back. And if you don't know how to do these exercises, or you don't know whatever, I feel like I've failed them as a clinician, because every single time they come in my office, we are revisiting those exercises and we're progressing or regressing as needed. So that's what carries people forward, is the mindset of dependency. Like, I have to go to the chiropractor to get in alignment, which we all know is nonsense, versus self-sufficiency, which is I feel like it's an empowering thing, right? I feel like I can do something to manage this condition. That's what people want, and that's what people are going to get.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. It's using that whatever power balance there is, or power imbalance there is between the clinician, the doctor, and the person, to rather than use it in a negative way and telling someone they're out of alignment, is using it in a positive way and getting people to implement something that can literally save their life, which is exercise. And that's something that we have hard research on. And getting people to, whether it's cardiovascular or even just doing light workouts, or even just walking or rehab movements, whatever it may look like, those types of interventions are incredibly powerful. They're incredibly important. And also putting that confidence and ability back into the patient's court is, I think, something that is one of the best things a doc or a clinician or a physio or an osteo can do. So really what you said there, like, awesome stuff, like nail on the head. I love to hear chiropractors talk like that, because I just don't hear a lot of chiros talking like that in my neck of the woods, down here in little old New Zealand. So that's really cool. And then I know Mr. Tony Stark. I know, Stephen, you've got a few toys and things that you love to use on your patients. I would love for you to briefly just tell us what they are, and then also tell us how you take something that's passive and turn it into something that's active and more long-term, have long-term effects for the patient, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, so I feel like my most important tools in my office are my brains and my hands. And so I have a bunch of Hyperice products, and I love those, all vibration based, and I use those to complement the soft tissue stuff and the adjustment. And I explain to every single patient, especially the new patients, I really hit it home to them that what we're doing in that 15, 30, 75-minute appointment is just a very short time. And there's so much that they have to do outside. There's so many factors so many variables that we have to account for that are predisposing them to whatever is collectively making everything wrong and bringing them in. And I just remind them that we have to look at everything and pick things apart and find the good things that they're doing and increase those and decrease the bad things. And to ultimately to allow them to come in and see me as little as possible, or even never again. I love when I can tell a patient that I don't need to see them until they want to see me again.
I like that. Yeah, that's crucial, because with like the more traditional type of chiropractic, it's one of the unique professions where you can almost do a bad job and be rewarded for it, as long as you've like communicated to them in a way that has them believing and really wanting what you're selling, which is not based in science or evidence, but it's sad to see. And that's what I wanted to touch on next with you guys is how do you make a treatment plan ethical, in your opinion? Because I find, what I've heard from you guys sounds great and seems very ethical, but I've just seen so much out there of, hey, you're out of alignment, and type of terminology. This is like legitimately, my brother was told, hey, you're out of alignment, you're not holding your adjustments, you're going to have to come in 2-3 times a week. And he was like telling me this, and I was like, look, I was trying to explain to him why that's not necessarily accurate, but people were like, hey, you need to come in 3 times a week for 10 weeks, and then 2 weeks for the next 5 weeks, and then you need to come in for wellness checkups for the rest of your life. Otherwise, you're going to fall apart and your bones are going to slip out of place. That type of narrative is dangerous. It's incorrect. It's borderline abusive at times. How do you make sure your even with your rehab stuff, how do you make sure your plans are ethical? And is that something you think about? I'm sure it is. We'll start with you, Dr. Mike.
It all comes down to one simple question. Is what I'm doing in the best interest of that patient? That's the only question you have to ask yourself, right? Don't don't let the bank account drive, your decision making. Now, of course, get paid what you're worth and get paid for your time, but is what you're doing the best for that patient that's sitting in front of you? And to kind of touch on what you said, like, if it's just it's destructive. If somebody's sitting in front of you and you have to scare them to get them to do what you want, you're already off to a bad start, right? But if you encourage them and empower them and say, hey, listen, we're going to take care of this. We're going to work together as a team. I'm going to guide you along the way, but I can't do it for you. You're going to have to help yourself a little bit. Right. And people, yeah, okay, I can do that. It's just more positive. People respond better to it. It's just, it's like the theory, if you tell somebody that there's something wrong with them, that's what they start to believe. But if you tell them that they're getting better, even if sometimes when patients are in my office, like things are going along and I just tell them, hey, listen, like you're doing a great job, or that looks really good. Even though we're still working on it. I mean, that in their head, they start to think, okay, I'm doing a good job. This is good. Positive reinforcement. So yeah, a patient should never leave my office afraid of what their condition is, unless it is something big and scary. And luckily, knock on wood, nobody's come into my office with anything big and scary. And if that was the case, I would really emphasize that something bad was going on. But with the conditions I treat, most people, it's like, return to activity, return to exercise, etc. It's usually nothing that they need to be afraid of. In fact, it's something that we should be able to conquer head on. And most of my treatment plans are 4 to 6 weeks. So, because I know if I'm not creating any sort of change in 4 to 6 weeks, I need to be sending them somewhere else.
Yeah, that seems to be the sweet spot that I hear from lots of different types of clinicians. What are your thoughts, Stephen?
Very, very similar. When I tell patients that 6 to 8 visits, they're going to be as close to 100% as possible as they can, unless there's underlying factors at play. And we make sure to go through whatever those potential underlying factors may be, and then consider whatever course of action may be necessary after then. That one patient I mentioned earlier in the podcast, they were just very confused about everything, and I was like, you have very, very mild symptoms. I'm thinking 4 visits at max, and everything's going to be pretty much back to normal for you, as long as you keep doing the right things. And they were just kind of blown away by that. And they're a medical doctor.
Yeah. And I suppose we know if things are not sinister, or, we don't have those red flags, that people are most likely going to heal quite nicely by themselves. And in the meantime, you can get them out of pain. And I remember with the old Carolina movement doc, and he put one of his Instagram videos that he does up.
Quick funny story. So I haven't met him in person yet. Him and I are actually in the same business group, so hopefully I'll get to meet him in September for our live event. But that's another story. So him and I are both in North Carolina. He's in Charlotte. I'm in Raleigh. And we have chatted kind of back and forth. And funny enough, we found out that we both grew up in the same neighborhood back in New York, like exact same neighborhood. He's 10 years older than I am, but it was kind of funny that so I mean, small world. Yeah, but I do know him. Scott, he's a good guy. He's got some really funny videos. He produces good content, and he practices very similar to how I practice. So he's a good guy.
Yeah. He talked about on one of his sketches, one of his little videos, he was saying, of course, they're like, oh, well, if manipulation, if it's all short term, why do you use it? And he's like, why do I have caffeine? Why would I take a Tylenol or an anti-inflammatory? Or it's like a similar thing. I think it's incredible, even just if you strip everything away and you have someone that's a great adjuster and they can help modulate someone's pain in the short term, that's powerful in itself. Something that drug-free pain management in the short term, fantastic, as long as you're being honest and open with your patient about the expectations, much like what you've just talked about. like that in itself is actually a pretty amazing thing. And the more I look at the research and the more I look at what the literature says and, where all the new kind of studies are going as well, because there's a lot of stuff happening, it's very exciting. And a lot of the cool stuff that we've always known is now coming out in the literature, and we're able to actually point to studies and say, that's actually pretty cool. Like, we've actually got some studies now showing that it's, One interesting thing I wanted to ask before we start to wrap up is, you mentioned, touch wood, you're not going to have any, anything super sinister or red flag type thing or anything really bad happen. The likelihood is like every doctor's going to have something come across them, right? And in chiro school, they kind of scare you, everyone's going to have that one at least. But how important, I mean, I know the answer is going to be yes, but how important is it for you to be methodical and, really committed to doing the proper tests, the proper examination and assessments, to be looking for the red flags, so that you don't unfortunately miss something if it does happen to come by? And we'll start with you, Mike, and then we can go to you, Stephen.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that I think, unfortunately, that the reason some of that stuff happens is because we're not being methodical and we're not taking our time. And I get that some people want to build up their practice and time is money and they're going quick and, unfortunate things happen. So that's why I have an hour-long initial appointment with, and I make sure that all my patients fill out their paperwork. So that way, before they even step in my office, I've read their paperwork. So, because if I do see, and I have red flag questions in my paperwork, like the big scary things that they, talk to you about in school. I'm going to quote Mark King, the president of MPI here. He says, you don't have to know exactly what's wrong with the patient, but you do have to know or suspect that something is wrong. So if you have that kind of, it's a gut check, right? Like if something doesn't feel right, get them out of your office. That's the best thing you can do for that person. I did have one patient that I had to have a little bit of a gut check on, and he didn't have anything like life threatening, but like the presentation of his condition and the circumstances revolving around his condition were very, very, suspicious, and referred him out somewhere else. And it was and didn't do any treatment on him whatsoever. I knew something smelled fishy. So but to all the kids in school that are going through chiropractic school, learn all that stuff. Know it for boards. You're not going to remember all of that stuff when you get out into practice. Trust me. Like there's no way you retain all that information, but know the big red flag stuff. If something doesn't feel right, again, it goes back to do what's right for that patient. Don't try to make a buck just because you think you can. Do what's right.
Yeah, no, that's good. And Stephen?
Yeah, being methodical is the best way to prevent slipping up and missing red flags or yellow flags.
Yeah.
Find your system, do it, and listen to your gut. I've had a few instances where I've had to refer a patient out immediately, and it would go anywhere from like mid-adjustment where they throw something else out there that they just refuse to disclose on the paperwork, and I'm like, no, you're done. Or it's been the fact that they couldn't even do the paperwork themselves. I'm like, your husband just checked off 8 out of 12 of the potential stroke red flag questions. I'm not touching you except to help you get out of the door.
I like it.
I've told, so I teach at night in a massage program, and I've told my students that I'm very blunt in those instances because you have to be.
Yeah.
If you downplay it, they're going to perceive it as it's not that big of a deal. If you set precedents for whatever showed up through your methodological process and you found these yellow flags, or more importantly, those big red flags, and you do not sit down and speak to them eye level, this is what could happen, then they're not going to perceive it that way, because no one thinks worst case scenario. I mean, they may pretend to, they may to a degree, but no one really thinks I'm dying or I could die.
It's like that. It'll never happen to me type thing, eh?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, that's interesting, eh? Okay, so we'll start finishing up, but I definitely have a few more. One question that came through on Instagram was how do you guys go about establishing your paperwork when you're first starting your practice? Is it like, do you kind of look at what you had in clinic when you were at uni, at college, and then change it to how you need it, or is there MPI stuff? Like, how did you guys go about that? We can start with you, Dr. Mike.
Yeah, just I kind of picked and chose things that I liked from multiple different like paperwork. Mine is, I think, relatively extensive, but that's how I want it to be. And I've developed a system where the patient can fill it out online, because a lot of times when patients come into the clinic and they still have to fill out paperwork, they get lazy with it, right? They just kind of run through everything really quick. And I mean, I still have patients that will run through their paperwork extremely quick, and makes it a little more challenging for me because I got to ask a bunch of follow-up questions. But yeah, just take a lot of what you from different people. I mean, I didn't steal. He gave it to me. Mark King's like intake paperwork stuff, and the clinic, obviously. So the clinic is going to have the most extensive intake paperwork ever imaginable, because they have so much liability with students and everything. So if you want the most thorough paperwork imaginable, just take exactly what your school gives you, because it has to be that way. And I added a bunch of my own stuff to it, like I talked to you guys about. Like I put basically red flag questions, like, are you experiencing any of the following? And sometimes people have checked those red flag questions, and that's an opportunity for me to follow up with them, because one of my questions is worst headache imaginable, because we're looking for possible stroke or aneurysm, something. And then the patients will follow it up with, well, yeah, when I get migraines, like that's the worst imaginable headache I've ever gotten. And I'm like, okay, so it's migraines. That's not something I need to call 911 for, right? So yeah, just kind of pick and choose what you like. Just make sure it's thorough. Don't cut any corners. And you'll constantly always, for the person who asked the question, like you'll always go back through it every once in a while and tweak a few things. Like you'll see somebody that's filled out something, you're like, oh, I should ask this question, or I should rephrase that question because it's not how I wanted, or that's how that person perceived it. And oh, that's okay. So yeah, I mean, it's an ongoing process. We'll tweak it.
Us. And you, Steven?
Yeah, mine was a combination of what the school provided, what I used as a massage therapist, and what I got from Mark King as well.
Yeah, nice.
We're all just using Mark King's paperwork.
Yes,
with a few extra things.
It's pretty good. It's pretty good.
Sounds like
he's a systems guy. He's Mr. Systems. So I mean, he's if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Yeah, it's like once I've finished all my research, I'm planning on opening my own clinic, and I've already got like all my paperwork like sorted. Like it's real funny. Like everything's like sorted, and I've like pulled from like all these different people and different people and like clinics and college, and to make sure I've got like the most important stuff. But I thought that was an interesting question. Okay, a little bit of a quick fire. What was the wackiest thing you were taught in chiro school?
So it wasn't in chiro. Well, I'm sure there's things, if you put me in the moment in chiro school, I would have said that. But recently I went to a for our continuing education thing, I was at this seminar thing, and the wackiest thing there was this guy said that he could restore ankle dorsiflexion by putting pressure on the talofibular ligament. So he was having people line up in the front of the room, and he would just push on their talofibular ligament as hard as he could, which is essentially the ligament in the front of your ankle that attaches your talus to your fibula. And I was like, I'm pretty sure ligaments are stabilization structures. Like, I don't think that's how it works. And, my buddy and I were there together. We laughed about that one for a good while.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, sometimes I wonder if we are as temperamental as some of these people think. how are we jumping and running and sprinting and playing combat sports and not being knocked into a pile of goo? Okay, good. No, fair enough.
I literally ran and tripped myself up in the classroom one night to demonstrate that to students.
Oh yeah, you told me that.
We're not fragile.
Oh.
I mean, I did bruise my knee a little bit, but I mean,
we're not. We're pretty resilient creatures.
Yes.
Okay, and so another quick question: what made you want to start your practice right out of college?
To keep it short and sweet, I kind of preface it like this: imagine that somebody gave you, or you had $150,000 to $200,000 and you had to bet it on something. I don't know about you guys, but I would rather bet it on myself all day long rather than bet it on somebody else. And I just knew pretty early on that I did not want to, because either way, it doesn't matter if you're an associate in this profession. And don't get me wrong, being an associate for some people is the right move. For me, I just didn't feel like it was the right move. But I figured I could either, work really hard for somebody else and build up their dream, or I could go out and work really hard and create my own. So, I mean, in that context, I thought the answer was pretty obvious.
Yeah, nice. And the other thing with, I would be interested to know your thoughts around some of the more, without name dropping, the more philosophical people in the chiropractic profession that really cling on to this idea that you can move a single bone and without going into detail about what happened and stuff, pretty much there was some stuff some stuff went down on social media, someone was called out and it was the Gondroids again anyway, and then Stephen comes in with his burn. I'm not sure if you've seen it. I'll have to send it to you if you haven't. But Stephen comes in with his burn about Joachim studies and the ability for us not to be able to move single bones.
I know it. Yeah.
I'm really interested to hear your thought process, not necessarily personal against anyone, but really interested to hear your thought process about that idea that they are superior because they can move one bone with the distal end tip of their index finger. Lateral
tuft.
Yeah. No, I know what you guys are talking about now. No, I mean, I didn't comment. I didn't reach out to that person. I know who it is. It's just, I kind of make the joke, the fighters that lower fighters call out the top dogs all the time. And I get it, whatever. Yeah. So, it's almost like a little bit of a compliment. He knew what he was doing,
that's what I thought.
He knew what he was doing, and he knew exactly who he was calling out. He knew that there would be a little bit of an uproar. I think he was looking for a reaction out of me, and he just wasn't going to get it. So, in terms of the bone out of place model, moving one, I mean, it's not, at this point, it's just so silly to even argue it. That's just not how it works. And, if you want to continue thinking that way, that's fine. You can continue using a flip phone. You can continue driving a Model T Ford. That's fine. You can do all those things. I'm going to continue advancing with the profession and taking the best, research and stuff and being evidence informed and learning as I go rather than just based off of this ideology of this is what one person said and that's what goes. So. Yeah.
Right. And good on you. It's being able to take the high road in a sense and be professional about it and not even feel like you need to respond to, because like you said, he knew exactly what he was doing. It's good, it just shows that you're professional and you're mature and you're just doing your own thing. You're killing it in your own, your own clinic. So that's cool. But yeah, we'll finish it up there. Obviously, thank you for coming on the podcast. You're our first guest ever.
I appreciate that.
Hopefully you enjoyed it.
Absolutely. I appreciate you guys having me on and
thinking
thinking of me. It's quite the esteemed honor to be the first guest on this podcast, and I know you guys are going to have many more episodes to record. So hopefully, years down the line, maybe somebody will dig this one up and we'll have a good laugh about it. So,
welcome to the Strengthandchiro Podcast. Introducing your hosts, Doctor of Chiropractic, Stephen Redmon, and powerlifting world champion, Brogan Williams. Join us as we explore evidence-based chiropractic and sports science through the lens of movement, strength, performance, and overall health.